There's a specific kind of moment that some people know very well. You're in the middle of an ordinary conversation, and something lands differently. A pause that stretched just a beat too long. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. A word someone chose, and you felt the weight of what they almost said instead. You registered it. You filed it. And when you looked around the room, nobody else seemed to notice anything at all, and then comes the quiet question that follows you out of the room. Did I make that up? You didn't. What's actually happening in those moments has a name, a mechanism, and a body of research behind it. And if you've spent years feeling like your mind works differently without ever being able to explain why, this might be the clearest picture you've encountered yet. Let's start with how the brain handles information. At any given second, your nervous system is flooded with input. Temperature, light, background conversation, the tension in someone's posture, the smell of the room, the hum of an air conditioner you already stopped consciously hearing. Your brain cannot process all of it. So it filters. Aggressively. It decides, below the level of your awareness, what is relevant and what gets discarded before it ever surfaces into your conscious mind. Psychologists call this mechanism latent inhibition. It's the brain's ability to suppress stimuli it has already flagged as unimportant. Something that's been in your environment for a while and caused no consequences gets gradually muted. This is efficient. It's adaptive. And for most people, the filter runs strong, but not for everyone. Some brains allow more through. The background noise doesn't fully quiet. The subtle shift in someone's tone doesn't get filed away automatically. The inconsistency between what's being said and how the body is saying it doesn't get smoothed over. More raw signal reaches awareness. More gets noticed. And here's what matters, that alone isn't a gift. Without the cognitive capacity to organize and interpret that volume of input, it would simply be overwhelming, like trying to hear a single voice in a room where every sound is equally loud. What makes it meaningful is what the brain does with all that input once it arrives. In the late 1990s, psychologist Elaine Aron documented a trait she called sensory processing sensitivity, found consistently in roughly 15 to 20% of the population across cultures and species. Her research found that what defined this trait wasn't fragility or emotional excess, though those labels often get attached to it. The defining feature was depth of processing. People higher in this trait don't just receive more, they do more with what they receive. They hold information longer, examine it from multiple angles, connect it to patterns from previous experience, and arrive at interpretations that feel obvious to them but invisible to the people around them. Aron's work suggested this wasn't a disorder, a sensitivity disorder, or an anxiety condition with a softer name. It was a processing style, one that appears in over 100 species, with a plausible evolutionary logic. In any group, having some individuals who pause, analyze, and assess before acting provides a different kind of value than those who act quickly on immediate information. The cost is that it's slower. The benefit is that it catches things others don't. There's a well-known experiment from 1999 that might help illustrate this. Researchers asked participants to watch a video of a basketball game and count the number of passes between players on one team. While participants were focused on this task, a person dressed in a full gorilla costume walked slowly through the middle of the scene, paused, faced the camera, and walked off. Nearly half the participants never saw it. This wasn't carelessness. Their attention was fully engaged. But when the mind is locked onto a specific task, it begins excluding everything that doesn't serve that task. The gorilla didn't help anyone count passes. So for many observers, the gorilla simply didn't exist. Researchers named this inattentional blindness, the tendency to miss highly visible events when attentional resources are already claimed. Now consider what this means for someone with a more open, less filtered perceptual system. They're watching the same video. They're counting the passes. And they also see the gorilla, notice that one player looks uncomfortable, and register that something about the whole setup feels slightly staged. Same footage. Fundamentally different experience. This isn't imagination. It's a different attentional architecture, but here's the part that rarely gets discussed honestly. Growing up with that architecture doesn't feel like a superpower. It feels like disorientation, it feels like saying something that seemed obvious to you and watching it confuse the room. It feels like sensing a shift in a relationship weeks before it surfaces, with no way to explain your certainty without sounding paranoid. It feels like reading a situation accurately and then second-guessing yourself, because the people around you seem unbothered, and you've learned to use other people as calibration. Over time, a pattern forms. You pick up something real. You mention it, or you act on it, and nothing confirms it yet, so it gets dismissed, or you dismiss it yourself. This happens enough times that a new habit develops without your permission. You stop trusting the signal, not because the signal became less accurate. Because you were trained, quietly and without drama, to distrust it. This is one of the more specific costs of high perceptual sensitivity, not the perception itself, but the self-doubt that accumulates around it.
No explanation, no conversation. It was simply no longer his and then it was someone else's. Marcus couldn't prove a connection. He was not entirely certain there was one. But something in the architecture of his trajectory had shifted. Not loudly, not cruelly, just quietly, in rooms he wasn't invited into, through calculations no one showed him. This is the most common form of consequence after a poorly timed raise conversation. Not retaliation, not punishment, just a slow, invisible recalibration of who gets the next opportunity. A subtle resorting of investment, of sponsorship, of who gets considered first when something meaningful opens up. It doesn't announce itself. That's what makes it so difficult to account for. The wrong lessons. Some people process an experience like Marcus's and decide the answer is silence. Wait indefinitely. Let the organization recognize your value on its own schedule, and never introduce the friction of asking. That lesson is also wrong. Organizations do not spontaneously correct underpaying people who have not made visible what they want and what their alternatives are. Silence is not a strategy. It is simply a different form of mismanagement. The actual lesson is narrower and considerably harder to hold. The ask is not the conversation. The ask is a signal. And what you are genuinely managing in a compensation conversation is not the quality of your argument. It is what that signal communicates to the people receiving it, and whether what it communicates makes them want to retain you, or simply wait to see whether you will quietly manage your own frustration for them. There are conditions under which a raise conversation functions exactly as intended. Where it accelerates a discussion the organization was already having internally. Where the leverage is genuine and legible. Where the manager has both the room and the motivation to move quickly.
Others feel something subtler, discomfort. Not because the perception is wrong, but because being accurately seen, especially without asking to be seen, can feel exposing. When someone notices the thing you thought you were hiding, even without intending to intrude, it creates a feeling that's hard to name. And people don't always respond well to that feeling. This can produce a particular social experience, insights that land as intrusions, accurate reads that get labeled as assumptions, a vague sense that you notice things you weren't meant to notice. No one says it directly. But it shapes who trusts you, who keeps distance, and how much of your perception you learn to keep private. So what do you do with this? The honest answer is that the perception itself isn't the problem. It's not something to manage, suppress, or apologize for. It's a processing style, one that comes with both significant advantages and specific costs. Like most things that actually work at scale, the real challenge, for most people who recognize themselves here, is what happened to the relationship between the perception and the trust in the perception, because at some point, for many people, those two things got separated. The seeing continued. The trusting stopped, and without that trust, awareness doesn't become clarity. It becomes noise. It loops inward instead of moving outward. Every accurate read becomes a question. Every correct intuition becomes something to argue yourself out of. With that trust restored, and with some structure around how to use what you're picking up, it operates completely differently. The same information that was creating anxiety becomes orientation. The same pattern recognition that was producing overthinking becomes clean signal. That shift, from perception that loops to perception that lands, doesn't happen through insight alone. It happens through practice. Through learning, specifically, how to work with this kind of mind rather than against it. If that's the part you've been missing, not the understanding, but the practical side of building real consistency with it, I've left something in the pinned comment. It's a 7-day reset designed around exactly this pattern: the overthinking, the second-guessing, the gap between what you see and what you trust yourself to do with it. Simple daily steps, built for minds that already understand too much and act on it too little. Check the pinned comment or the description if that's where you are.